Hello everyone. I know I'm early for your sakes. Signs of the times and everything. I hope I'm not too late. Anyway, I'm Tamir Kreisman from Jerusalem, Israel. This is Parashat Bo. Come, Exodus 10 to 13. I hope your ears are open right now. This one's called Shade. About a month ago, we had the luxury of obtaining somewhat of a bird's eye view of all the events that had transpired from the time of Abraham until the descent of Israel and his sons into Egypt. This, of course, can be found in Psalms 105. We went through this. Now, if you don't know this, there's a very strong connection between King David and between Moses. They were both kings, psalmists, mighty rulers of all the tribes of Israel. While Moses was the giver and the teacher of the law, David was his top student. It is said of David that every opportunity he had, he would read through the writings of Moses, looking for hints and clues and something to grasp. He also did much of his studies regarding where God would choose to place his domain, as we learned, with the prophet Samuel by his side. And Samuel, by the way, is also, it was said that he was on the level of Moses and Aaron combined. Also a very, 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 very high soul. The uniqueness of the book of Psalms is that all those that read the book, you can see that they have similar qualities to the 5 books of Moses. Now, David is the author of 75 out of 150 of them, while Moses contributed 10, from 90 to 100. Nevertheless, we see that in the Torah that Moses was a singer and songwriter himself, as he wrote 2 of the most significant songs in the world, Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, and Ha'azinu. The reason I'm prefacing the study with this info is so that you understand that the Psalms are not just songs, but rather revelations of the hidden aspects of the 5 books of Moses themselves. And we know that every single letter within the Torah has a meaning, and it's never out of place. So too is the book of Psalms. As its letters and verses with its punctuations and carefully chosen breaks and separations to days or weeks or the number of books have a very unique and specific purpose. All ties in beautifully with the Torah itself to complement it and give it yet another dimension of life, meaning, and understanding. And this proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, the Tanakh, have all been written through the divine revelation from God. It's the same Ruach HaKodesh. The Tanakh has dozens of writers and authors, contributors, spanning over 1,000 years, but only one true author, the master of the universe. Because as we see, there's no contradiction. Everything complements everything, and this is something that cannot be just written by really smart dudes, you know? So when we read Psalms 105, we gain more clarity and understanding of what actually took place from the time of Abraham to Jacob and Joseph, Moses and Aaron, the Exodus, the giving of the Torah, and the ascent to the land of Israel, if you read Psalms 105. The last 2 verses in the Psalms have yet to happen, though, fully. We did enter Israel, but we're talking about the final redemption, of course. But keep those eyes open, you fortunate ones, for you are about to witness the Torah come to life. In last week's Parsha, we just concluded with Moses calling off the tremendous hailstorms that was destroying the Egyptian infrastructure. The storehouses, the fields, the vineyards, and pretty much anything else that was not secure under heavy concrete bricks, which also includes killing anyone or anything that got caught out in the open. The hailstones were huge blocks, and inside these gigantic blocks of ice burned fire. In addition, they were so big that they used to make a screeching sound on the way down, right? Remember those, you see the World War II videos where the German Luftwaffe somethings, how they would dive down and they would make that screeching sound? And it was for effect to terrify the innocent civilians that would get bombed. So this was the same thing. This is what happened. It was also to terrify the Egyptians. In addition to that, the Ramban said that the thunder and lightning, while this was happening, was an actual storm. The thunder and lightning were ramping up to the point that they were constant. It was always thunder and lightning non-stop, in addition to everything falling out of the sky. And this is a land that has never seen hail, nor a cloudy day. This is Egypt back in the day. They didn't need rain as they received all their sustenance from the Nile, which was their life source. Which is why it was messed with first. But we'll get into that soon enough. Anyway, here in this week's Parsha, we have locusts, darkness, and the killing of the firstborn. So we know the order of the makot, right? Which properly translates to beatings. Makkah is a beating. But it would be easier, I presume, to just call it plagues, okay? Because we're all used to that, although it's not exactly, Anyway, Magifah is a plague, but Makkah, fine. But we turn to Psalms 105. Let's start reading from verses 24 to 27, which ties the end of Bereshit to Shmot. And he made his people very fruitful, and he made it stronger than its adversaries, right? He turned their heart to hate his people, the Egyptians, to hate his people, to plot against his servants. He sent Moses, his servant, and Aaron, who he chose. And interestingly enough, before Moses was called when he was 80, Aaron was actually a prophet to the Jews inside the land of Egypt. So he was their already natural leader, right? But now he's working through Moses, or Moses was working through him. They placed upon them the words of his signs and his miracles in the land of Ham, Egypt, right? Right. He sent darkness and it darkened, and they did not disobey his word, right? Wrong. Right. Okay. Why did King David, who became the attribute of Malchut, the same attribute that has no emanations of its own, begin with the plague of darkness when it's actually the 9th plague? Well, the attribute of Malchut, as we discussed in plenty of times in the past, is the only attribute that does not have a light of its own, just like the moon. Again, all of these have different colors. The color of Malchut is actually black, because black does not reflect light. Okay, it has light, but it does not reflect light. The whole concept of a mirror darkly and everything that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and then others took it out of context. But just like the moon, it does reflect the light of the sun being in this case Tiferet. But that's not the only aspect that it reflects. Malchut receives them all. Remember, all the Sfirot are gathered up in Yesod and then poured individually into Malchut. And it's only within Malchut that a combination of the 10 Sfirot can take place and then reflect back what is given with all the colors, aspects, and attributes and their essences. So when King David says something, then we listen, right? And King David says, and he begins with all the plagues with darkness, dafka with darkness, because darkness is the aspect of which all the plagues are derived from, if you think about it. This is the darkness that was separated from the light, and this is the left that is opposed to the right. This is the judgment that is opposite to the mercy, and this is the affliction that is opposed to the remedy. Excuse me. So, within every single plague, an angel was sent to do the deed that was commanded by God and called upon by Moses. Interestingly enough, the first 9 plagues were actually engraved in Moses' staff. When it was time for the specific plague to manifest, it would illuminate on the staff, that Moses had. Now again, the staff, where does the staff come from? The staff comes from it comes from the throne of God. It was called a sapphire staff because we see gleaming sapphire beneath the throne of God. He gave that to Adam. We've been through this story already. So it was already engraved. In other words, from before the world was, all these things had to take place exactly how they were taking place. This is all part of God's plan and his timeline. So when it was time for the plague of blood, the name Dam would illuminate from the staff being engraved, and Moses would place his hand over the staff and he would hold it over, right? And so when it was time for all the makot, each name illuminated, and that's where he placed his hand. That's why he's take the staff, and he took the staff exactly at the right location. It's like a remote control almost, if you think about it. So he had to place his hand over the name while either lifting it, lowering it, or instructing Aaron to perform whatever task needed to be performed. But anyway, these plagues were prompted by the forces of darkness themselves. Their purpose was not to correct, but to punish Egypt for all they had done to Israel. Right? I said, if it's a punishment for Israel, it's not a punishment, it's a correction. But if it's for the nations, for anyone other than Israel, it's a punishment because of what they've done to Israel or because of how they've improperly behaved. So what does it mean when we say, and they did not disobey his word, right? He sent darkness and it darkened, and they did not disobey his word. Who did not disobey whose word? These are the forces of darkness who did not disobey God's word. The question is, why even say that? Of course they cannot disobey God's word. Now there are two explanations for this, because again, he knew exactly what he was talking about David. One, the Egyptians were from the same source of these dark forces. They were almost one and the same. So it's as if they had to destroy their own kin, the dark forces. And still they did not hold back from serving the Creator with joy. So that's why it says, okay, let's say the adversary, does he take pleasure in harming Israel? Yes, but not necessarily because he takes pleasure in harming Israel, but rather he takes pleasure in doing such a good job that God tells him to do. 2, they were commanded to destroy their own kin, but not harm a single hair upon the head of Israel, their natural enemy. You understand? They didn't take necessarily joy in harming the Egyptians, but they took joy in doing God's will. When it came to Israel, though, they know also that at the end of days, if Israel stands, they cannot. Nevertheless, who's the boss, right? And now that we know that what's behind all the makot, meaning the darkness, the beatings, let us begin. He turned their water into blood, and it killed their fish. Now we're starting. In other words, the second makah is actually the first one, which is blood. So you see, we can read this now and understand Torah on a much deeper level. One that has been staring at us in the face all along. Water, mercy. Blood, judgment. Look at that. You see this? And this was actual blood. Not like people showing you videos today on YouTube over the past however long. Oh, look, it's biblical. That ain't biblical if water turns red. This was actual blood. Blood. The water, the source of all the livelihood in Egypt, turned to actual blood. As a result, it brought death to that which is fruitful and multiplies. Vayamet et agatam, and it killed their fish. Again, these were not metaphors or allegories necessarily, although they carried many deep spiritual connotations. This was the real deal. This was happening. This was all from God. And this was just the beginning. Their land swarmed with frogs in the rooms of their monarchs. Remember this. Why is it saying the rooms of their monarchs? Were they not swarming everywhere? Yes. Wait. Sharatz artzam. Remember that word? Sharatz, sheretz, shratzim. We were referred to by the Egyptians as shratzim, vaishretzu. Sharatz artzam tzvardeim bechadrei malchehem. In addition to the disturbing thought of every inch of the land being covered in frogs, this ain't Kermit the Frog, okay? Wait till I tell you about the specific amphibian that made its way into the crevices of Egypt. That's even more disturbing. Also note that Although the blood killed all the fish in the Nile, it did not kill the frogs who then emerged from it. Now, frogs was something that was supposed to humiliate the Egyptians as well. When they referred to Israel, like we said, as shratzim, vermin, creepy crawly things, or reptiles, that all falls under the category of shratzim, behold, God said, I'll show you shratzim. I'll show you vermin, and I'll show you all what's what and who makes what, and I'll show your almighty army that you won't even be able to stop these vermin. In fact, you claim that you control the river Nile. Let me show you who controls all things. So not only did the frogs come from the water, all water in Egypt became frogs. They produced the frogs. They rose from beneath their marble floors, Chazal say. Right? Because they could shut the doors. They didn't necessarily have cracked wooden doors. Egyptians back then were more sophisticated than what we are today. But they came in through the floors. In a cup where they were drinking from the sweat of their brow, inside their intestines, wherever there was liquids, that's where be frogs. When Pharaoh sent the decree to kill the male children of Israel, all the women who gave birth had to do so in complete silence and sorrow. When you scream, it sort of relieves the pain a little bit, right? You know, it's like holding in a... Well, okay, I'm not going to compare the two. I don't know. I'm sorry. Anyway, the women had to hold in their screams during childbirth as to not alert the Egyptians. As a result, the deafening silence of pain of the daughters of Israel became the insufferable croaking of hundreds of millions of frogs that gave them no rest, inside them and outside them and all around them. Furthermore, this completed a circle with Pharaoh and Abraham. The frogs entered every corner of Pharaoh's personal chamber. Now we're going to understand why it specifically said this pasuk, as well as his intestines more aggressively than any of the other Egyptians. Now, here's why. Okay, now this is a little disturbing, but we're all adults here. Well, some of us are. I'm working on it myself. And we're learning Torah. So for the sake of Torah, so you understand that God's judgment is righteous. So you understand what's behind all these things. All these things are not necessarily taught in your everyday, Sunday school or whatever, because it's stuff. You'll see. Anyway, back when Abraham was in Pharaoh's house, right? And Pharaoh took Sarah. He couldn't touch her because she was surrounded by angels who punished him, gave him makot every single time he tried to approach her. Sarah, our mother, was considered to be one of the most beautiful women, if not the most beautiful woman to have ever lived. That's right. As a result, Pharaoh, wanted her, couldn't have her. After they left, Pharaoh sculpted her image in stone and he hung it over his bed during the day, and he on his wall over his bed, and every night that he went into bed, he would cast enchantments on this image of Sarai Menu, and he would take that image to bed with him. Pharaoh, how else do I say this? He made a sex doll of Sarai Menu. Now, you could say, okay, wait a minute. First of all, okay, let's take a moment to what? Yes. Was this not a different Pharaoh, though? This Pharaoh and Abraham's Pharaoh? Sure it was. But they made it a tradition to pass this image from Pharaoh to Pharaoh. Have no pity on this man. Have no pity on any of them, because it began with disrespecting our mother. And no one disrespects our mother. This is why the verse emphasizes their land swarmed with frogs in the rooms of their monarchs. You see, Malchehem, there was only one Melech, but it went all the way back to Abraham's Pharaoh. Anyway, yeah, it mentions 10 different ways that the frogs had their fun. And this is to tell us that this plague was almost as bad as all the others combined. Our sages say that this particular type of frog is called timsach, okay? Which is, if you Google translate it, it'll say crocodile. In Hebrew, it's taf mem samech chet. So it translates to crocodile, but it's not accurate. This creature is born in the sea, and it's likened to a large snake. While it's in salt water combined with the heat of the sun, it grows exponentially. Now, there's an island off the coast of Portugal, which is called the island of Timsachim, of the Timsachs, right? And the stories of that place are that these giant sea monsters would come out of the water and snatch 2 or 3 people or 2 or 3 cows in their mouths and just eat them and go back in there. So all the inhabitants had to be ready all the time, armed with weapons of war, and they had to really, set a perimeter over there. But this is just another opinion as to these particular Timsachim, these particular frogs coming out. Another opinion is that it started off with really one gigantic frog, and every time they hit the frog split in two. 2, 4, 6, 8, and so 2, 4, 12, 32, and I'm going to stop counting right now because that is not my strong suit. Anyway, they doubled and so on and so forth. So even in the tiniest little one, if you smacked it, it became double. Okay, so he commanded a mixture of noxious beasts, lice throughout all their boundary. Amar vayavo arov kinim bechol gvulam. Lice and wild beasts have been placed together just like blood and frogs, right? Those were from the water, the blood and the frogs. And the lice and the beasts, these are from the earth. Also the wild beasts to attack the body, while the lice primarily can be found in the head to attack the head. And this is foreshadowing to, we'll see this at the end of the drash. Although the lice was everywhere, but again, that is where its primary focus was. In other words, every plague was symbolic on every level. As we know, we're just going through various different levels over here. Physically, allegorically, and of course, spiritually. You see, just like Israel were bound by witchcraft that included all the levels of impurity that Egypt had to offer, as well as the entirety of the Egyptian population taking part in this slavery, so too God had to break these chains and decimate their foundation and spiritual grip upon Israel so that they would not only physically be free, but spiritually and of course emotionally as well. How long did this take? Well, so far it's been 3,333 years and counting, right? They had but a few moments of clarity from that time till this very day. We can count them. The Egyptian oppression, I'll show you the Mechaneh Meshutaf. Wow, see, look at that. Maybe it's a good thing to forget my English and go to the Hebrew. The common denominator over here. First one, the Egyptian oppression. 2, the splitting of the sea. 3, receiving of the Torah. 4, the 40 years in the wilderness. 5, the first king of the united Israel, David. 6, the building of the first temple. 7, reversing Haman's plans, right, Purim. 8, fighting off the Greeks during the siege of the Greeks, the Hashmonaim. 9, the return to the land after 2,000 years in exile. So that's 9, right? And the last one being in 1948. Now these moments have inched us closer to God's final redemption. And what do they all have in common? Because there have been many wonderful moments for Israel. But what these 9 moments have in common is the solidarity as a people. You see, even when the exiles came back from Persia to build the second temple, not everybody left, right? There were conflicts among the Jews. During all these 9 examples that I gave, there was little to no conflict. 1948, everyone was a Holocaust survivor, and we're like, yeah, we're Jews, we're fighting for our land, this is our land, we're doing this. And the Holocaust survivors became the soldiers on the ground who fought to free our land once again. So it's a solidarity. And this is why we kind of succeeded. And God created a solidarity in Egypt. There are many that fell away, but the core that stayed true, they were true. So I count 9, and there's one more coming. This would be the final one. Next, he made their rains into hail, flaming fire in their land. Natan gishmeihem barad esh lehavot be'artzam. See this verse? You think there's only one plague in this, right? Because we said there were flaming fires inside the hail. But look what David did. Meaning, look what God gave him, the understanding that he gave him. After the lice and the wild beasts, the next three are dever shchin barad, right? Death or pestilence, as it's translated, boils and hail. Now, this is very interesting. What did we learn last month about the word davar, which is written identically to the plague of dever, by the way? Genesis 37:11. So his brothers envied him, but his father awaited the matter. Into the Hebrew, Vayikanu bo echav ve'aviv shamar et hadavar. We discussed this, and then we also discussed later on in 37:14, just 3 verses later, when Yaakov sent Yosef to go to check up on his brother. It says, Vayomer lo lechna re'esh shalom achecha. See if there's, your brother's peace, their welfare, how they're doing. Ve'et shalom hatzon, and the flock. Ve'hashiveni davar, lashiv, bring back davar. Bring back word, okay? Davar is a hint towards malchut, and bring back the kingship. You remember that class? I spoke of this in, I think it was Vayeshev, right? Yeah. Vayeshev Yaakov beretz megurei aviv. Yeah. So you can look it up there. This davar, which also means davar ledaber, word, like Sefer Dvarim, or Bamidbar, anyway, you get the connection. In this context, it means pestilence. This is what dever, davar, pestilence. So just read this sequence with me and see the dual meaning. You can, they're interchangeable. Hine yad Hashem hoya b'miknecha asher basade basusim b'chamurim bagmalim babakar ubatzon dever kaved meod. There will be dever, pestilence, kaved, very heavy, meod, very much. Okay, dever kaved meod. And then for the 3 verses after that, vehipla Hashem ben miknei Israel uben miknei Mitzrayim velo yamut mikol livnei Israel davar. Vayasem Hashem moed le'emor machar yaseh Hashem hadavar hazeh. Could be also hadever hazeh, but it's hadavar hazeh. Vayas Hashem et hadavar hazeh. Could be hadever hazeh. Mimacharat vayamat kol mikne Mitzrayim u'mikne bnei Israel lo met echad. The dever and davar can be interchangeable in these 4 psukim, especially since they can be read in the same way exactly. Identical spelling. But the word of God will destroy the wicked while it will protect the children of Israel. In this case, it's their property, although a lot of Egyptians perished here too, because when you are an idolater, you are considered no better than the animals. So it says a lot of the livestock were gone, and again. Now, I will hit your people and their possessions, but not a single one of my children's possessions will be harmed. This is quite impressive. They could have even been mixed together in the flock. And so where is dever in Psalms 105:32? Natan gishmehem barad, esh lavot ba'artzam. Natan gishmehem barad, he made their rains hail, barad. Barad has exactly the same letters as, you guessed it, dever, davar. So it's right there. You have dever, barad, and dever is right there. Natan gishmehem barad, dever. And what about the boils? Where are they? Esh leavot be'artzam, flaming fire in their land. Those are the boils. The boils come from the fiery furnace, as Moses was instructed to throw the soot into the air. So we see judgment everywhere we look right now. And that's also why, even if you may think that the hail comes from water, mercy, they're still filled with flaming fire of the furnace. And even through water, God could cause extreme damage. See the flood. And to confirm this, and it struck their vines and their fig trees, and it broke the trees of their boundary. Vayach gfanam v'te'enatam vayishbor etz gvulam. Vines, grapes. What are grapes? It's the left side. It's judgment, wine, left side. Figs, mercy, right side, left side, right side. And where's the tree that it destroyed? The tree stands in the middle. Remember, for everything holy, there's something equally unholy. For everything high, there's something equally low, and so on. There are also negative sfirot. So again, in our tree, there is an identical negative sfirot tree. Now, we have Gfanam, left column, Tenatam, right column, Etz, and their trees, center column. God is dismantling them one piece at a time. Right now, he just removed all the columns going into the 9th Makkah. Removed all their columns from the tree, from their body, if you will. And all that remains is the head, but we'll get to that too. Now, once everything had to be crushed and burned and torn apart, once it's all then decaying, and yet there maybe there might be some hope for sifting through the wreckage of this once great empire to try and salvage something. Okay. And it struck their vines and fig trees, and it broke the trees of their boundary. What is that? Exodus chapter 10. For if you refuse to let them go, behold, tomorrow I'm going to bring locusts into your borders. V'chisa et ein haaretz, and it will cover the eye of the earth. It says, obscure the view of the earth, and no one will be able to see the earth. And you can't see in front of you, and they will eat the surviving remnant. All that debris, all that stuff, it's lunch. And they will eat the surviving remnant, which remains for you from the hail. You see how one makkah is tied into the next, tied into the next. They're all connected. They all have a meaning. And they will eat all your trees that grow out of your field. And your houses, and the houses of all your servants, and the houses of all the Egyptians will be filled, which your fathers and your fathers' fathers did not see since the day they were on the earth until this day. This never happened before in history, and it never happened since. He turned and left Pharaoh. So peace. That's exactly, no respect for Pharaoh. He said what he had to say, didn't bow out. He said, here's what's coming. See ya. And he walked away. It was said that the city of Egypt was 400 by 400 parsa. Now, according to one opinion, a parsa is 3,840 meters, meaning almost 4 kilometers, while another opinion says it's 4,608, so over 4.5 kilometers. So on average, let's say it's around 4,200 meters, 4.2 kilometers, times 400. That's 16,800 kilometers in each direction. Okay, in each direction. It was like a circle or like a square. I think it was a circle, actually. For perspective, that's larger than the actual borders of the country of Egypt today. We're talking about Egypt was a city. Egypt had plenty of lands. There was Egypt as the country, and again, some of the lands of Egypt even extended all the way to Canaan, right? They got stuff from all over the world. But Egypt had a capital city, which was called Egypt. This is the one with the 10 gates and everything, right? So 16,800 kilometers in each direction, okay? Larger than Egypt today, if you want to Google Maps it. And for my fellow Americans, that's the length from Maine to Florida. Maine to Florida, at least half of the United States is what Egypt was. That was just the city, and there was a mega city. The amounts of locusts it would take to convene all at once and cover every inch of that land, that the inhabitants would not be able to know when it was day, when it was night. And when the locusts ate everything that was left over from the hail and fire, they then entered the houses of the Egyptians. Now, it's very weird how this took place, because I'll tell you what Chazal say. Because this is what the Torah gives us. Now there's the explanation to exactly the order of how it went down. After which they remained in their place. They were there until they were done consuming everything, every last thing. There were 7 types of locusts sent to Egypt, corresponding to 7 times arbe. Arbe locust is actually mentioned. Now the main group were arbe, that's why they're called arbe, but underneath them there's arbe, salam, chargol, chagav, gazam, yalak, chasil. So those are the 7. But the primary is arbe. The thing is about these guys is that they can only eat soft things, the arbe, the largest group, because they have no teeth. Okay, so they can't eat anything but like kind of soft fruits and vegetables or whatnot. So the fact that they ate that much of everything, soft and hard, it didn't matter. It was, of course, by Moses' hand, by the word of God. It was insane. The way the city was set up, it was that, okay, so check this out. The way the city was set up, it was that the very center of the city, so think of it as a gigantic circle. Right in the dead center was the royal palace, surrounded by the next circle, which was where all the ministers lived. And then after that, there was another outer circle, and you had the upper class. And then surrounded by that, you had different classes going all the way out with their fields all around. And somewhere within these circles, probably somewhere along the sides, you had the land of Goshen, which was closed up like a ghetto, still within the borders of Egypt. Now, if you want a really good idea of how this looked, then Google Maps Moscow. Go to Google Maps, type in Moscow, and you'll see Moscow is actually built like that with circles. You have the Kremlin right in the middle, and then outer layers, and it goes by class, basically. Useless information, I heard at one point, and it actually is. Anyway, so, and it just so happens to be that Moscow is true north of Jerusalem. Look that up too. So, when the locusts come, they didn't spread from one direction or another. Here's how it happened. First, they covered the sky. You can't see the sun. And then they descended directly onto and into Pharaoh's house. And from there, they worked their way out towards the circles. You understand? So they were methodical. It was engineered like that. And one of the many more miracles of this plague is that they knew exactly what belonged to the Jews and what belonged to the Egyptians. If any of their stock or grain or whatever got mixed in, if an Egyptian stole anything from a Jew, if it was the Jews, it did not get eaten, meaning that whatever was left from all of Egypt, everyone knew that that belonged to the Jews. No question. No one questioned that. And this is a good way to know. It's like, okay, whatever's left, okay, give it here, right? So everyone knew this. And this is where Pharaoh said in verse 17, "But now forgive now my sin, only this time, and entreat the Lord." And without getting into it, he was not sincere. There are different explanations, not the point right now. Anyway, he was not sincere. And let him entreat the Lord your God, and let him remove from me just this death. Vayaser me'alai raket hamavet hazeh. Why death? Because now all the food's gone. And when the food's gone, there's no hope. Finally, all the effort that Joseph put forth, right? Put forth in Egypt, and he turned it into what it was removed. Joseph provided Egypt its strength through food, and the rest of the world was in famine. God took it away. Who's in famine now? But wait, you think this is done? It's not done. But what about the dead locusts? A lot of locusts, they're frail little cricket type things. They fall, they die. It says that they were, some were even glued together to bolster the effect. Also, locusts are a very good source of protein, which just so happens to be halachically kosher. I'm not saying you should go eat locusts. I don't eat locusts, okay? Unless you have to, like when the zombie apocalypse is going to hit. Then if you find locusts and you got nothing else, eat it. Just remember that. Anyway, the Egyptians collected all the dead locusts and stored them in barrels and fermented them. Okay, hey, they got some food now. And that's when the Lord reversed a very strong wind, and it picked up the locusts and thrust them into the sea. Not one locust remained within all the borders of Egypt. No protein snacks for you. Nothing. And since Moses prayed that they should be gone, till this very day, we have not seen all 7 of these locusts convene in one place. and do this kind of damage. So again, when people say, oh yeah, locusts of biblical proportions, feel free to roll your eyes and snicker. Right. Okay, but the Lord strengthened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel go. He didn't send them, because he could no longer believe what his eyes have seen. After he saw that even everything that they had collected and put in barrels and fermented and sealed away, everything was left, that not one locust was left there. And I don't believe it. He thought that he was crazy for what he was seeing, and he didn't believe. He's like, no, I gotta be seeing things after everything that he had already seen. Yes? He was in denial. Sorry. And when we have eyes but choose not to see, God will show us that now, even though we want to see, we cannot see. And so darkness is pulled over our eyes of those who do not recognize God's hand in all things. Before the darkness came, God consoled with the heavenly hosts. He had a meeting. He says, listen, here's what needs to go down. Is everyone in? And they said, yeah, sounds good. Let's do this. And so in the middle of a clear, sunny day, at noon, the darkest, thickest cloud descended upon the entire city of Egypt. Remember how big Egypt was? Yeah, just in that perimeter. Anyway, no light whatsoever. It was as thick as a dinar, they say, as a coin. I don't know if it's like, if it's flat or round. Anyway, it was so thick that it said you can actually touch this darkness. Candles, torches, furnaces, bonfires, they could not be lit. Nothing could be lit in this darkness because the darkness was so thick. It says that it had no room for oxygen, that it snuffed out the air. Listen, the angel that was in charge of this darkness, could have been the darkness itself, brought upon Egypt even more darkness than what God had said. But don't think for a second that he transgressed God's word here either. Remember, God actually had a meeting. He convened with them, and they all worked together. He showed God that he gave them exactly the amount that was coming to them based on their deeds. And God said, all right. Now know this. The 3 days of darkness was actually 3 times 7, or 7 times 3. In other words, when it says 3 days, it's 7, 7, and 7. So that was a total of 21 days of darkness. And if you're wondering, now again, there are various different opinions. Some say that it was 3 times 3, 3 times 5, because we know one of the opinions by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says that in the end of days, before Mashiach comes, there's going to be 15 days of darkness, but not necessarily by a cloud, just that the sun will not shine. So it's not this darkness, because this is a different kind of darkness. So the sun will not shine, the sun will be blackened. You'll still be able to light candles or whatnot. Do you have them? And then, things will happen. Anyway, if you're wondering about the oxygen, because I said, if fire cannot light, how can you breathe? One of the miracles is that they actually couldn't breathe, and yet they could not die. So the darkness kept on, they could not, it says, they could not breathe from their nostrils or from their mouths. They were like choking to death, but they didn't die. Not fun. So the darkness kept on increasing and increasing to the point where at first they could not even recognize their brother beside them. You could be standing right here and I don't see what's going on right in front of my face. Later on, the last 7 days, it increased to the point where the darkness got so thick that they could not move a muscle. Okay? If you're doing a handstand and it got to that point, you remained in that position. If you were sitting, you remained sitting, lying, standing, I don't know, doing the Bruce Lee one finger push-up. That's where you remained. That's how you remained. They were stuck, almost like, if you think about it, in a tar pit, right? The thick darkness, you just go down there, you can't breathe, you cannot move, you're stuck, and it hardens. This darkness, according to the Midrash Tanchuma, was from the fire that surrounds the world. This fire that surrounds the world is not a fire that it's a black fire. It's a different kind of, it doesn't emanate light. It does the opposite, or does it? Wait. This is one of the higher levels. It's one of the highest, it's actually on a higher level than all the other elements. This specific fire, this specific darkness. This darkness had a personality of its own. It was a sentient being. This darkness was not the absence of light. This darkness that covered the face of the deep. And now the earth was astonishingly empty, right? And darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God is hovering over the face of the water. And the only reason for the first week, the only reason that it was easier and it wasn't harder because for the rest of the time was for God's name's sake. Why did God bring the darkness at 12 o'clock noon when we all know that that's when the sun is at its peak? Because there will always be those, and there are, always will be, always be those who choose to deny what they see and will always give it an excuse. If it would have been any other time when after the sun sets or before the sun rises, they would just say, well, it's not God, it's just a really long night, because all of a sudden we move to the North Pole, right? If you go to the north, it can stay dark for months at a time during wintertime. There will always be those who choose not to look, who deny. I remember in X-Files way back in the day, every time Mulder would be like, yo, this is not normal, and he comes up with a theory, and Scully was like, Mulder, I'm sure there's a perfectly good, logical, scientific... Shut up already. It was like that, right? Just shut up. Just look. Do you see? Sometimes I want to shake people because I end up banging my own head against the wall and it hurts. Anyway, there will always be those who choose not to look. And it is they who are living in darkness, and they see whatever the darkness shows them. And this is the most dangerous part. They did not see each other, back to Torah. They did not see each other. And no one rose from his place for 3 days. But all the children of Israel, there was light in their dwellings. I'm going to read this in Hebrew for a reason. Lo ra'u ish et achiv velo kamu ish mitachtav shloshet yamim. But we said the 3 and it was the 7. Ulechol bnei Yisrael haya or bemoshvotam. Now here's another miracle. Not only was it light in the land of Goshen and in the homes of Israel, but what they saw was exactly the opposite of what the Egyptians saw, meaning that the light was not limited to their dwellings. Now we know this because they went into the Israelites, they went into all the homes of all the Egyptians because the Egyptians stole all their gold. Remember, the Jews were the rich ones in Egypt, and then they stole all their gold and all their silver and all their belongings. So they went in there, and they could see, and the Egyptians are frozen; they couldn't see. In other words, what? Were they lit from their eyes? Were they lit from inside themselves? Look what Exodus 35:3 says: Lo ta'avru esh bechol moshvoteichem beyom haShabbat. You shall not kindle a fire in any of your dwelling places on the Sabbath day. Can you kindle a fire on Shabbat only, or not kindle a fire on Shabbat only in your dwelling places, or wherever you may be? You see, it's not limited to where you are. You are now free to move about the cabin. It's not only in the land of Goshen, it's wherever they went. So as physical as this darkness was, it was also spiritual. But what else happened in the darkness? 80% of Israel gone. We'll get to that. Midrash Tanchuma says that in that generation there were many reshaim, wicked, among Israel who did not want to leave Egypt. Hear me now. They had no problem calling the Egyptians their masters, as they allowed them to mingle with, yeah, I'm Egyptian now too, sure you are Jew, whatever, but fine. These people were very wealthy as well, and they lacked nothing, it says. These members of Israel were serious idolaters, just like the Egyptians. These people would have no problem selling their brothers out. In fact, they did. These people of Israel, did not identify themselves as Israel. And what was the purpose of the Exodus? To receive the Torah and elevate God's chosen people, that we can rectify the world. That is why God took us out of the land of Egypt. That's why he always reminds us. But these people, they didn't want the Torah or its commands. They wanted all the luxuries of the great metropolis. These people were not worthy of redemption. I'm still quoting Chazal. They were not worthy of redemption, and for God's namesake, he killed them off in the first week of darkness. So Israel could bury their own, while those same naysayers, it's a long night. Yeah, look, he's also killing the Jews. So they won't point a finger, even though they know better, but they choose not to. Here are the rough estimates, okay, of how many perish. Because they're like, oh yeah, remember, as it was, so it will be. Acharit kereshit, the final redemption will mirror the first redemption. Behold the first redemption. 600,000, Shishim Libo, we know this, 600,000 men from the ages of 20 to 60. Now, double that for their wives. That's 1.2 million people, right? Now, Chazal say that each family had a minimum of 5 children. A minimum of 5 children. Every household. Remember, they were fruitful. They were multiplying. Made good slave labor too. So, each family had a minimum of 5 children. So, let's go with 1 up. So, we're not going to give the minimum. We'll go with 1. So, we'll go with 6 children, right? Now, so that's 600,000 families, men and women, right? Times 6, conservatively speaking, that's about 3.6 million. So 3.6 million plus 1.2, that's 4.8 million. Not including the older men and women from ages 60 and above. That's another 600,000 plus 600,000, another 1.2 million. That's a total of 6 million Jews that left Egypt. And they were a fifth of the number of the children of Israel living in Egypt at the time. And that's around 30 million Jews living in Egypt. And that's also 24 million Jews that God destroyed the first week of darkness. 80%. 80. Now here's what you have to understand. And I also find this fascinating. We've been learning from all these plagues that while it's bad for the Egyptians, it's good for Israel, right? It's judgment but mercy, judgment but mercy. Every time the Egyptians got hit, Israel benefited from it. Because there are some opinions of our sages that say that it wasn't necessarily darkness, but rather it was holy light. And they're both correct, but check this out. The light was shining so bright that it blinded the wicked. And so as far as they were concerned, it was pitch black. If you take a spotlight and put it right in front of the eyes of a blind person, it's all dark all the time. They might feel the heat, but that's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about mamach darkness. If you're blinded by the light, it's a matter of perspective then, right? How could Israel have possibly withstood this holy light if they were on such a low level of impurity? As we know, they were on the 49th level of Tum'ah. They haven't even circumcised their children yet. They will when they slaughter the lamb. But the answer is because only because they suffered so greatly all those years. Now, again, suffer greatly all those years, they were able to not only withstand, but to bask in this light, while the light was around everyone else, but that same light blinded everyone else. It's like the furnace in Malachi, the same furnace that will burn the wicked will heal the righteous. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Now, the Ramchal says regarding the ways of God that this is the system in play. And I was thinking about this when I was reading that. I was thinking about what the Ramchal says when I'm reading the Parashat. Anyway, and there are times that each scenario must be played out. So this is this time. This system allows evil to grow strong in order to demonstrate after that the ultimate power of good. Now, these are hard words. I'm saying this. But they can explain all our hardships from Egypt to the Holocaust. As long as evil is in ascendancy, even good must endure the suffering that evil causes. Not because they deserve it, not because the good deserve it, but because that is what the time demands, right? The children of Israel, they had to go down to Egypt. Why? For God to do what he had to do. The time demanded it. Nevertheless, when the force of divine good becomes revealed and assumes total power, they will receive their full reward, dead or alive, yes, for all the evil they had previously endured. For instance, if someone is killed for God's namesake, Avinu Malkenu Nekom Nikmat Dam Avadecha Shafuch, right? Pay back the spilled blood of your slain servants. So that means anyone that was killed for the fact that they were a Jew, defending their land, any kind of terror attack even, any kind of persecutions, the Holocaust, of course. These people, they don't need any more correction, right? They've already gone through the fire here, and then they go directly to Gan Eden. That's why Holocaust survivors, these are angels among us. And unfortunately, we forget all about them. Now think of everything that Israel witnessed during the Exodus, and the splitting of the sea, and the receiving of the Torah, not to mention over the 40 years in the wilderness, which is every day was outside of space and time almost. No generation had ever experienced anything like that before. We can't even imagine it. People, religious people, Orthodox people have a hard time understanding what exactly went down. We can only read it in words and try and imagine it, but we can't even understand what they saw, and this might help you understand the kind of hardships that they had to endure. Because they endured those hardships, they got to see that. You get what I'm saying? Okay. As written by Moses himself in Psalms 90. Samchenu kimot anitanu shnot ra'inu ra'a. Cause us to rejoice according to the days that you afflicted us. The years that we saw evil. Please. But as long as evil is ascending, their merits of the tzaddikim will not help them escape from it, as the verse states in Amos 5:13, Lachen hamaskil ba'et hahi idom ki et ra'ahi. Therefore the wise at that time shall keep silent, for it is a time of evil. There were so many tzaddikim, so many just amazingly great rabbis and communities of incredible Jews, God-fearing, Torah-keeping Jews who perished in the Holocaust. How do you explain something like that? It still doesn't sit right, and yet this gives us a slightly better understanding of how it works. These were the times. And also, it said a lot of the tzaddikim back then, that the information of what was coming, because a lot of the tzaddikim, they prophesied, they saw, and it's a prophesied, a word that should not be loosely used in different communities wrongly. They received information that these things were coming. The Chafetz Chaim, he saw World War I coming. The dates, he also saw World War II. He was gone before World War II, but he saw these things coming. And all these other great rabbis, and if they knew what was coming, they would pray against it, and God would listen to their prayer, and he would stop it. But it was the time, it needed to happen. After the Holocaust, we returned to Israel, right? It's not, we don't know the cheshbon. You understand what I'm saying? But it's how God works. Because who are we? But we can only try, and we are obligated to try. So this is what we're doing. So if you don't recognize what time it is now, and let's be real, most people don't. I mean, see, I see this because nothing really has changed. Everything I've said, I'm observing myself. The world is covered in darkness, and you're looking exactly where they want you to look, and you're missing the bigger picture. I said this last week again, And you are being watched. You think you're watching a show. You are currently being watched. You don't understand. But don't take my word for it. The Ramchal continues. Furthermore, since it is part of the nature of evil to bring out all types of destruction and to wipe out any semblance of order, or what you might perceive as order, not only will the merit of the righteous not save them from evil, but the very opposite will come about. The wicked will prosper and succeed in whatever they do, while the righteous will be oppressed and downtrodden. Thus our sages describe... I love it when me and the Ramchal see eye to eye. Thus our sages described in the prelude to the Messianic era, insolence will abound, the wisdom of scholars will be scorned, those who fear sin will be despised, and the truth will disappear. Masechet Sotah 49b. And of course he completes it with, and truth is lacking, and he who turns away from evil is considered mad, and the Lord saw and was displeased, for there is no justice. From Isaiah 59, all of which had been discussed over the last several weeks, maybe even months. This if God wishes to direct the world through the system that reveals his oneness, he must allow evil to intensify while ignoring the merits of the righteous. Because if you take into account the merits of the righteous, it can actually combat evil, right? The merit of the righteous have the power to change the world. One righteous man can hold up the world. What, you think everyone that was taken in the Shoah was evil? Chas v'shalom. No, absolutely. Did they have it coming? No, they did not have it coming. And yet, these are the times. What time is it? It all comes down to the times. So shall the outcome be. And do you know what time it is now? What is everybody celebrating over there? What exactly do you think is going to happen? Hey, you're still in bondage. And you're still in idolatry if that's the case. And they are showing you what you want to see. And so the outcome will be what many of you are like, this and this. Okay, and you know this, you see this, but you also know what is supposed to happen. When they show you what you want to see, you, like many others, will follow without question, because they are showing you what you want. Give the people what they want. They'll follow you like mindless sheep. Do you want God's kingdom or not? And so whose kingdom exactly are you rooting for? Don't you see? Don't you understand? Even whatever you think is going to happen, happens, even if it does. And it may seem like a good thing, or victory, yay. But if it's not written in God's plan, and we have his plan, it's called the Torah and the Nevi'im, and Chazal, they tell us what is going to take place. I give out, I sound like a Borough Park rabbi now. Then you are being deceived. And if you think that the world is just going to mercifully, cheerfully, with butterflies and ice cream, going to transition into the coming of Mashiach without every last government body, country, establishment, organization, Mickey Mouse Club crumbles, you are currently in darkness. What are you rooting for? Don't you see? Because you know what has to happen before things actually get good, right? I mean, you know this. It's right there. Psalms 105:36. And he smote every firstborn in their land, the first of all their strength. If there was a house without a firstborn son, then it was the head of the household that got it. Every single head of everything will be taken out. Why? Because everything must fall. Because at that point, God would have dismantled the entire body like he just did with the 10 Makot. And what's a head without a body, right? You take out all the foundations, you get them here, you get them there, you get them here, you get them there, that's it. Now you're left on like nothing. It's like a bobblehead, just a flick, you're done. That's like a king without a kingdom. Right now, that's Pharaoh. What strength do you have left, Pharaoh? What do you have to negotiate? Nothing. And that's why Pharaoh's like, okay, go and take your sheep and that. And Moses is like, oh, we're taking your sheep too. Straight up. So why is God doing this? Why had he done this with Israel back then? All this. And why do we have to go through this again? These are not my words. It's not even my opinion. I would really not like to necessarily go through this. And yet, this is what the word says. This is what is coming. Not necessarily plagues exactly like this, but you understand? How many survived the darkness again? Just checking. When Mashiach comes, you will not be able to stand unless you are tried and refined. Because he's coming with fire, with judgment. You know this. And the more filth that you have on you, the more it's going to hurt. And if you're clinging on to something else, dark, you won't see what comes. You might spontaneously combust unless you are stripped away of all manners of this world and governments and completely empty of your own wants and your own ambitions, which again, I see what's going on. I'm like, am I a maniac? Is this I'm sitting here raging at just the camera right now? For what? On a Monday. God will take away all options of salvation from you, no matter what. No matter where they come from, or who they come from, or how they come, be it a charismatic leader or a miracle cure. When the enemy were at the gates, all power was given to one man. That man never relinquished that power. See Julius Caesar, Adolf Hitler, and whatnot. I know that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And any person who seeks power is one who should never attain it. You should run from them. You still don't understand that you're being played. The world has truly gone mad. Everyone is being played. That's why I believe in no one. And I trust in no one and nothing except for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's it. Everything else is a lie. Everything. I don't even believe my own eyes because I know that they deceive me. This is written. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them that they shall make for themselves fringes on the corners of their garments." What does a tzitzit represent? Throughout their generations, and they shall affix a thread of blue sky, tchelet, on the fringe of each corner. This shall be fringes for you, and when you see it, you will remember all the commandments of the Lord to perform them, and you shall not wonder after your hearts and after your eyes, after which you are going astray, because God knows that our hearts and our eyes will deceive us. You have to hold on to this for dear life. ולא תטו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם אשר אתם זונים. זונים. It comes from the zonah, the prostitute, the harlots. This is what we see, and this is what will lead us astray. So that you shall remember and perform all my commandments, and you shall be holy to your God. Who are you running after? What are you rooting for? What are you focusing on? How much time do you think you have left? I am the Lord your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt. To be your God. I am the Lord your God. I told you, I warned you. I'm sorry I got to do this. I feel uncomfortable doing this. You will be tested more so than any generation that came before you. And you cannot even trust your own eyes. That's a scary thought, right? We know that the overwhelming majority will fail. are failing. It's already written. I walk around with this understanding, trying to always figure out where I stand and what I can do. Where am I positioned now? And if God moves me, I don't hold on to this position anymore. The shift, right? You got to move with the shift. You're on His time, not your own. You don't do what you want. You go where He puts you. Start walking in that direction. I'll let you know when to stop. Lech lecha. But let me tell you something. This is not a miserable existence, but a blissful one. A lot of people are freaking out of everything. Oh, what's it? Who's in control? Who is in control? Are these things terrifying? Well, all the potentially really not nice things? Of course they're terrifying. But who is in control? And we can only do the best that we can do. That's what I got. I don't know what's going to come tomorrow, but I'm doing the best that I can do today. That's it. That's all I got. And I'm putting my stock in Him. That's it. I chose to follow God and no man or institution. I believe in the Holy One, blessed be He, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He swore by His own name to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, this is my God. The God who removed you from the land of Egypt, who saved you from bondage, who redeemed you, who took you as a nation, and who will bring you to the land. God has all the answers. I have none. Okay? But from the little that I know, all I could do is point. Hey. Okay? All eyes on Him. That's it. That's all I can do from the very little that I know. Please look up and not elsewhere. Be safe. Take care. Yeah. And hold your breath. All right. I hope to see you all on the other side. Bye.